The Salem witch trials were a time in history when the village of Salem accused men, women, and children of practicing witchcraft. The year was 1692, and the trials were about to take place. Both sides of the debate did not get equal rights, but either way it strongly affected history. The question is, were the blamed really witches, or were they merely just innocent people? It didn't matter. By the end of the witch hunts, 19 people were hung, and some died in jail waiting for their trial.
Salem town was located in what is now the United States. The village was part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was under British rule. Salem was mostly made up of settlers from England. In fact, the governor of the village at the time of the trials was from England. Life in the late 1600s was tough, for the families had to support themselves. Making their own clothes, planting vegetables, and raising meat were a daily struggle for most families. The harsh climate of a rough, rocky terrain was hard to farm on. A drought or flood could wipe out an entire family's crop. Most people living in the village, being Puritans, had a strong belief in the devil lurking behind every misfortune to take place.
Over 200 individuals, and sometimes whole families, were convicted of witchcraft, though not all were from the village of Salem. The witch scare in Salem really began when Tituba, Samuel Parris's slave, began to play around with his daughter Betty and his niece Abigail. They created fortune-telling circles, with Tituba leading them. Pretty soon, friends of the girls joined, and the circles were a popular activity. The children soon all began to have fits, so the parents took action. They blamed Tituba of witchcraft after making a witch cake. The cake was made with the urine of Abigail, and when the family dog ate it, he too acted strangely. Tituba was the first person in the village to be blamed, but also was the first to confess to witchcraft. She was then kept alive and used against others being accused.
Of the 19 people who were hung, Bridget Bishop was the first. George Burroughs, who was executed August 19, 1692, was the supposed ringleader of the witches, or in his case, a male witch was known as a wizard. Giles Corey was also accused of being a wizard by Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, and Abigail Williams in April of the same year. All throughout his accusation, he kept completely mute. His penalty for refusing to stand for trial was death by pressing of heavy stones over wooden boards. He was executed on September 19th. The judge ordered that he be buried in the gallows graveyard under an unmarked gravestone.
Of the people accusing others of witchcraft, most were Puritans. A majority of the town of Salem took part in convicting witches and wizards. Even the town's governor took part in the witch hunt. The most famous accusers were known as the afflicted girls, and were the ones who felt the power of the accused people. Afflicted girls often accused multiple people of witchcraft. The youngest accuser's name was Ann Putnam Jr. and was 12 years old at the time. A confessed witch, Tituba, was also helping out the accusers. She was brought in during trials to prove that the convicted were guilty.
At the court of Oyer and Terminer, a court built specifically for the witch trials, there were many issues as to the fairness of the arguments. Not only were the judges biased because of being a Puritan and religion, but they also had no legal education. The trial itself was very unorganized because the judges had no control over the room, and any citizen in the audience could speak their opinion. Also, those accusing were allowed to speak privately with the judge previous to the trial.
Towards the closing of the hunts, many things caused the town to cease accusing people of witchcraft. One of the major motives for ending the trials was citizens began to doubt the accuracy of the outcome. When Reverend Increase Mather began to believe some guiltless citizens were being convicted, he stated, "It were better than 10 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person should be condemned." Another turning point was George Burroughs recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly at his hanging. Witches are servants of Satan, not God. Eventually, the cries of the afflicted became ignored and the accusations halted.
In May of 1693, Governor Phipps pardoned all the remaining people in jail. In 1706, Ann Putnam Jr. publicly apologized for her actions. During church, her apology read, "I desire to be humbled before God. It was a great delusion of Satan that deceived me in that sad time. I did not do it out of anger, malice, or ill will. She was the only afflicted girl to apologize. In the conclusion of the Salem witch trials, a total of 19 people were hung, 1 was pressed to death, and an unknown number, approximated at 13 people, died in jail. The Salem witch trials proved to hold a question of whether or not the trials convicted people of performing real witchcraft, and to this day we do not know the answer.